What were your thoughts on the CBA and the possibility of maybe adding a 17th game?
It's really above my pay grade in a lot of ways. I understand pros and cons to all of it, and I know it's one of those things. I don't have a vote on it. It's above my level. So whatever they decide and figure out, we'll go with.
Do Terry and Kim consult you in regards to your thoughts on expansion of playoffs or any of the things that are on the table at those meetings?
We have conversations, but it's never like. It's never been a hardcore. What would you do if you were us? But I think we've had conversations before, either over dinner or just sidebar stuff. But nothing of late. I think like us, they're as curious from their seat of what'll transpire if anything does get done.
How much does it impact? Depending which way it goes, what you do with your contracts, guys you're extending. I mean, you have to kind of juggle a lot of different rules if they change things around and things like that.
Yeah, we're paying attention to it. We at the labor seminar in December, they tried to school us up on some of the what ifs. If you do go into the last year and nothing gets done, these are the things that will be different. And then these are some of the things that we're talking about potentially for a new CBA to be prepared for. But overall, we're just operating status quo right now. That's in a kind of a what if floating cloud, out here. If it happens, great, we'll figure it out. What they'll do is if they do a new CBA, they'll call us together and have a meeting and review, especially all the new things that we need to be prepared for whenever that date happens. But I'm just operating as is. We're going into the last year, and until it changes, nothing's new.
Have you noticed it slow down negotiations at all? If guys are like, well, I want to see what the new revenue split is, or I want to see what the rules are. Have you kind of noticed a little bit of a waiting game, I guess?
I think agents are more trying to wait more necessarily than teams are.
Yeah.
I think they want to understand, and I'm sure with an additional potential game that's being talked about,
right.
That makes sense. And they may not have been, I don't know, as schooled up as we were from our December meeting of what changes there would be. So probably a little bit more unknowns for some of the agents out there than for some of the clubs.
Do you have a preferred, in terms of extending guys who still have 1 year to go on their deal, not speaking of anybody in particular, but do you have a preferred timetable
To do them? It can vary, not necessarily. I think we've done probably the way it's worked out, I've done more after the draft. Since
leading
I've been
up
here.
to September 1st maybe?
Yeah,
Would be the,
if you think we did Jerry, we did Hauska, Eric Wood, I'm trying to think of, there may have been one or two others, but that's been more, there's just so much going on from when the season ends through the draft and free agency. It's hard to slow down and focus on guys that you already have under contract. Things will slow down a little bit for us on the personnel side, in mid-May where I can kind of focus, but I would not be hesitant to do a deal now if it made sense with the agent and with the club.
Can you take us through the thought process of bringing in Greg Olson, negotiating with him, and that whole process?
Yeah, so obviously I'm very familiar with Greg in Carolina when we traded for him in 2011. He was the first tight end, I believe, in history to have 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. So multiple All-Pros, Pro Bowls, and a guy he's put up some great numbers in this league, and so anytime there's a guy like that, you're gonna, check it out. I'm always, you guys hear me, I'm always gonna be looking from draft, free agency, salary cap cuts. Somebody thinks this guy's too old, but maybe I don't. Whatever the case may be, I'm gonna take a look. Now, it doesn't mean because we bring a guy in for a visit that we're necessarily gonna sign him, but if it's somebody that I think can help the Bills, I'm going to investigate it.
Building on that, then, the XFL, is that something that you've kind of kept an eye on and had your guys look at?
Yeah, anything that's football, we're going to check it out. CFL, XFL, we were watching the AAF, so I think it's good. I love these other leagues. Just we don't have a minor league system like some of the other professional leagues do. So for us, that's another chance for guys to play football. You can only, you can run around and work guys out, but this is true simulation, helmets on, pads on of playing the game. So we definitely do have an eye on the XFL.
This wide receiver draft class, and we're assuming you might take one of these guys. What are you looking for ideally, based on what you already have on the roster? What kind of guy, what skill set are you really looking to hone in on these guys?
Sal, it's a good question. Honestly, I'm looking for a good player, and I've said this before. Receiver of all position probably comes in the Baskin-Robbins 31 flavors, like size, speed, length, guys run after catch, all sorts of variables. There's really small guys that do a lot of the stuff that Isaiah McKenzie does behind the back, behind the line of scrimmage. There's guys that I call playing above the rim.
Athleticism of your head coach, Sean McDermott.
Hey, Coach McDermott.
We'd like that answer to that.
It's a declining. But in all seriousness, Sal, there's this is a deep receiver draft. I think I can say that now. It's I feel more comfortable. I was asked about the Senior Bowl and still was doing some recon on some of these guys. But the only one of the last things left is the medical, some of these guys, and make sure they medically check out. But if that happens, I think it will be a very deep position, probably the deepest in the draft. And we're not just looking for a certain thing, a speed or a size. We're looking for good players that we know that can come in and fit alongside what we've already got, the John Brown, Cole Beasley, and the rest of that group.
How much does your how are you trying to fill Lorenzo's spot? I mean, he did a little bit of everything, and in your scheme, that linebacker isn't on the field a whole lot. How are you looking to try to fill that specific spot?
Yeah, it's hard because there's not a lot of guys, speaking of Lorenzo, who played a D tackle at one point, there's not a lot of guys that can play a stack linebacker like he could and then also give you something as a pass rusher. And not only on the edge, we had him rush inside, over guards as well. So I'm not sure we're necessarily going to find that piece. Doesn't mean he's the only one, but there's various rushers, guys running 3-4s and 4-3s. So we'll obviously try and find, a guy that can at least play will linebacker. I don't know if we'll have, a spot that the guy will play that and also give us something at rush. There are guys that will do it, but it's not very many.
How much direct cause and effect is there in your ability or inability to sign your free agent edge or defensive end, Shaq, and maybe throw Jordan into that mix, and your draft plan? I mean, are they directly linked, or can you go into the draft just focusing on what this draft offers? It seems to be a lot with edge guys, and that's regardless of what happens with your free agent.
Yeah, I think it's irregardless. I think even if we sign back both Shaq and Jordan, the guys you mentioned, it would not deter me in any round to take another pass rusher. I think it's one of the premium positions. You see where those guys, the elite ones, get paid. After the quarterback, that's usually the next highest paid position. So if there's a guy there in any round that we think can come in and help our roster, we would take him whether we re-sign those guys or not.
And then along with that, the defensive line restructured Starr's contract a couple weeks ago. What was the thought process behind that? What's the impact of that moving forward?
Yeah, the impact is that, it gives us a little money back to use elsewhere, and Shaq's been Starr's been a great player for us and done a great job, and unfortunately he doesn't get the credit he deserves, and I'm probably his biggest defender out there, and I'll continue to be, for the sense if you ask our D-line and you ask our linebackers, you go ask Luke Kuechly in Carolina, I know how much he loved him and told me he missed him when he left, that this guy eats blockers and he helps our run game. One of the biggest things that we struggled with in 2017 was our run defense, and if you don't stop the run, you can't get to third and long to let the pass rushers free. So that's what Starr does. But we did work a deal with him, which gave him some guaranteed money, and kind of protected him. But then he gave us something back in return.
In a general sense, you had a year where you took on cap space. You had a year when you revamped a whole side of the ball, and now from the outside it appears more fine-tuning. Yeah. Which one of those is the most challenging for a general manager?
Yeah, it's all hard, because people say, well, you got, $80 million. But if you know me, I want to draft, develop, and sign our own. So it's not like we can go out and spend a bunch of money in free agency and then watch our own guys walk out the door. So it's a fine line. We do have holes to fill, but we also want to make sure we have money in 2020, and then we got some guys coming up in 2021 and in 2022. I want to make sure we have the funds to be able to re-sign those guys if they're willing, to sign back with us.
Are you satisfied with what you have at tight end, or do you feel that's still, after you addressed it heavily last year?
Yeah.
Is that set in your mind, or do you feel you need to do any more?
Satisfied in me is not we don't get along too well. So I'm always looking for whatever position, tight end, running back, whatever you name it, Vic. If it's something that I think will improve our team, whether it's adding leadership, whether it's adding, an elite player on the field, whether it's a young guy in the draft, any of those areas, I will attack it. Competition, I think, brings the best out of guys. So I'd rather have too many at one position than not enough.
Brandon, both you and Sean are familiar with Josh Norman, just released by Washington. Is there mutual interest in bringing him up to Buffalo, kind of keeping that pipeline going?
Yeah, we're very familiar with Josh. We had some great years with him, and remember the day we drafted him and where he grew from. So, he is out there on the free agent market, and we have looked into him and even talked to him. So, nothing more than that to where it would go. I'm sure, he may have some teams that he's looking at beyond Buffalo. So, probably similar to Greg Olsen, he's in a spot where he'll be able to choose where he wants to go. He's officially a free agent. So, beyond that, I don't know, what his plan will be or whether we'll come to any type of agreement.
Brandon, going back to the wide receivers and just it being a deep class, even more than it being deep, what is the most unique thing about this class that's different from years in the past?
The depth is the thing. I don't know. And there truly are a lot of different guys. I mean, you can, I've looked at just some of the mocks to see where people have guys coming into this combine, and there's speed, there's size guys, there's underclassmen, there's seniors that didn't come out that that are very good too. So I think there could be a lot of guys drafted all the way through from 1 to 7 that could truly, I mean, we were talking about the other day, there's going to be guys drafted on the third day of the draft that may come in and take a veteran spot on a team. It's that deep.
Does it matter who you have currently at the position when you go to make the draft pick? Meaning, like we think in terms of, you're going to fit in because of what you already have, but you're hoping this draft pick's with you for 5 or 10 years. So how much does that come into play when you're actually making the pick?
Yeah, I mean, again, back to competition. You bring it in, you let him compete it out. Maybe in year 1, he doesn't necessarily beat out the veteran, but he earns some playing time, learns, how Sean and I want to do things, on the field, off the field, and maybe it's in year 2, but you've got him on a cost certainty basis for at least 4 years, and that helps you. If you add it there, maybe you move on from the veteran player that he took over in year 2, and allows you to sign another position at a position of need in 2021.
Your offense was 24th in yards, 23rd in points, 26th in passing. It got better, but what do you need?
Yeah, we need to score more points. That's what we need to do, and it affects. There's so many reasons why you got to score more points. So you got to protect better, you got to run the ball better, you got to throw the ball better, we got to catch it better. I mean, we have a lot of work to do. It starts with me. Making sure I'm bringing in the right personnel. There were some things we did this offseason and last year that helped, and I thought Brian Dayball and his staff and Josh, they took a step in the right direction. Obviously, it wasn't enough, and we got to take a bigger step next year, and those guys will be the first to tell you we got to grow. And again, there's no more blame on anybody than I look at the man in the mirror on that. So again, we'll continue to look to add pieces, here in March and April, and see what it looks like after the draft.
You mentioned Brian Dayball, and obviously adding weapons. Laviska Shenault's a guy that really can kind of do everything, and I know you've scouted him quite a bit. What do you think of what he can bring, not only as a player, but his versatility? Because I know you guys love that.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good player. I think he had a little bit of a nagging injury this year, but if you go back and watch his film before, he's been a productive player at Colorado and put his name up there as one of the better receivers, and we'll see. He's a bigger young man that, to your point, Matt, has done some things down the field, but also done some of the stuff behind the line of scrimmage. Kind of a bigger, thicker guy that doesn't necessarily always have to run around guys, can actually run through guys as a receiver. So his tape was fun to watch.
When you have such a deep wide receiver class here, what is the opportunity versus the challenge of trying to play the draft where a lot of these
these guys are probably going to fall down further than they usually would, whereas trying to, or potentially missing out on the one you like.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for us to get our board right and to make sure we're putting the value on it and see where the value is. And how much better is this guy that we have a first-round grade on than a mid-second or even into the third, and then what other positions of value are up there. And if we're on the clock in the first round and there's a receiver there and there's a player at another position and they're both at similar value, and I look down and see, man, it's a long way before the next one at the other position is, I probably should take that knowing that there's more guys here. But again, the receiver might be sticking out as clearly the better player, and if that's the case, you take the best player on the board.
When you look back at who you eventually picked, when you come back to this event with the interviews and the chance to sit down and talk to them, have you ever looked back and thought how impactful maybe any individual was when you got a chance to meet with them here? And I know sometimes you meet with them at the facility, but talking about the interview, the actual talking to the player, putting them up on the board, that type of thing, how impactful it is.
Oh, it's huge. The medical is obviously the most important thing in the combine, but for me, the interview, getting these guys in a setting that they can't predict. We don't go through the canned questions. I'm sure some teams still do that, but for me, we get on the board or we watch film, and just to see how these guys respond. Do they take ownership of a mistake that, or that happened on a play? Why did you, do this? And just see their knowledge. What coverage is this? See where they're at. What personnel group? And find out, a little bit about them, where they're at, their knowledge, their love for the game. We ask them some questions about, when did you start playing football? What attracted you? What are you most excited about the NFL? Is it, is it money? Is it whatever? So we get into a lot of things. And to your point, there are times when you draft a guy, you go, man, I was sold on that guy the first 3 minutes of his interview here, in Indianapolis.
Hey, Brandon, they reduced those, though, this year. You lost 15 players. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's frustrating for me. That's probably of the change. There's always some good in change and probably some bad, but probably the thing that I was most disappointed in is going from 60 to 45 interviews. And so I got to figure out how we can make up for losing these 15 guys. I mean, we'll still get out, but I may find myself out on the road even more in March to try and get my hands on as many guys as I can, because I really want to get to meet as many as I can before I would turn the card in and say, this guy's going to be a Buffalo Bill.
Does it impact the 30 you can bring to the stadium?
We'll still be able to bring the 30. It changes the names because, maybe now I got to bring in a guy that if I could have got here, I wouldn't have needed to. I could have checked that box. So I hope in the future, and I've expressed, and I think some other GMs have as well, that 45 is not enough. We got to try to work that number closer to 60. I don't know if we'll get it back to 60, but that's probably the hardest thing with the change for me.